Inside this base is our objective. We need to collect the objective and escape without dying. But the catch is, all of these bases are made by other players and loaded with hidden traps and enemies to stop us stealing the objective. If you get hit once, everything resets and you have to try again. This game is called Meet Your Maker, and they've sponsored me to give you 16 tips and tricks on base building and base raiding. By the end of this video, you'll know how to build your own ultimate death trap of a base, and you'll have the knowledge to beat anybody's base that you come up against. But if you want to try and beat my base, you can grab the game for yourself from the link down below in the description. But when it's released on the 4th of April, it's on Xbox, PC and PlayStation, and you can play my map no matter which platform you're on. So we start out in this central hub where we can upgrade our armor, weapons, traps, abilities, and choose a base to raid, which can also be done in co-op, by the way. So starting out with tip number 1. This little robot you see right here will be following a direct path to the objective. So if you're ever lost, just go ahead and follow it. Tip number 2. Your grappling hook can be used to move around fast. But if you grapple and then you jump just before you reach the end, you'll actually gain a massive speed boost at the end of your jump. You can do this repeatedly to fly through the enemy bases, but some of the better bases will specifically lay traps to punish you for doing this. Tip number 3. Did you know that you can actually reset your double jump without landing on the ground? If you just wait until after the animation when your hand touches the wall, it will actually reset the double jump. You can do this repeatedly to stay airborne, and it's also very useful for evading projectiles in rooms with lots of enemies firing at you. Tip number 4. You can actually deflect the bolt shot projectiles if you attack them as the wall of bolts comes towards you. Timing this correctly is difficult, but it's ridiculously useful for those long corridors where you can't simply move out of the way of the oncoming attack. You can even parry enemy ranged attacks, but this is dangerous because if you miss, you'll die. Tip number 5. While you can rush through bases, it is actually more effective to intentionally destroy traps and enemies with your melee weapons and then collect the resources that they drop. This is a fast route to upgrading your weapons, armor and equipment, so it can be valuable to take your time farming resources. Tip number 6. It's possible to skip through some people's bases when they're using lava cubes. You see, you can actually use the grappling line to pass through one block like this. Now, obviously, if you're building your own base, you're going to want to make sure you block off those lava blocks so this doesn't happen to you. Tip number 7. Many enemies can be upgraded with armor, which means they can survive multiple melee attacks. This gives them longer to charge up their weapons to kill you, but you can still take them out easily by attacking them in the head, since the head is never armored. This can even be done with a ranged weapon, and you get bonus experience if you headshot the enemies. But if you're up against those really big brawlers, you can actually just bait out their attacks, go behind them and backstab, and that will give you bonus experience as well. Next we have tip number 8 though. You start out with 3 grenades that are super effective at decimating anything in tight corridors that may be lined with traps or groups of enemies. A few well-placed grenades into somebody's base can do all the work for you and then reward you with lots of resources to collect once you go down there. Next we have tip number 9. While you can easily finish any outpost without upgrading any of your equipment, weapons or armor, I would highly recommend actually grabbing the shield item, which can be used to block lava cube damage and even parry the claw trap, which will otherwise try and drag you into your doom. This is rather tricky to pull off, but my goodness, it is a game changer once you master it. Next we have tip number 10. You probably already noticed this, but especially for new players, I feel like I need to mention this. As you're moving through a base, you'll notice just before any attacks, you'll get a directional danger marker to indicate where you're being attacked from. This can be a good warning to make you take a step back or even turn around and deflect an oncoming hit. But very good builders will intentionally bait you with these notifications, so bear that in mind. Tip number 11. Many of the traps in this game, like the bolt thrower or the spike traps, only activate once. So sometimes it's easier to actually bait them into activating before you rush forward. You can even get tons of bonus experience for for making the traps destroy other traps. Now for the remaining 5 tips, we're going to swap over to the build mode, and I'll explain how to bait and kill every raider who comes to your base in the early game. Now the reason you build a base in Meet Your Maker is to farm resources from other players. Basically, if another player comes to your base and dies, any resources that they collected from your base by destroying any traps or enemies there then get dropped on the floor, and this happens every time they die. But you can then go into your base and pick up all the resources that they tried to harvest from. The game even tracks the replays of people dying horribly to your traps, so you can figure out weaknesses and then go back and fix them. So with that in mind, here is tip number 1. Firstly, to build a base, we need land. Each land has a building capacity limit, so you can't just have unlimited traps. So you may be thinking to yourself, well, I'll just save up for the biggest build capacity possible so I can have as many traps as possible. But the thing is the more traps you have, the higher the danger level. So that means more experienced players will probably come and try and do your base. So instead, for base building tip number 1, because I love psychological terror, we're going to pick the base with the smallest build capacity, because that means we can bait all the new players to coming to our low danger build when it's actually just a death trap. Tip number 2, your base will start out with loads of random blocks placed everywhere, which are using up your build limit. So make sure you go ahead and delete everything so we can start from scratch. Before you start, it should say 0 out of 1,000 or whatever your build capacity is. Then we know we're not wasting anything. Next, for tip number 3, each base is going to be randomly generated. So your genmat objective location will be in a random location on the map. Find where this is, and then you can start building your base backwards from here to be as efficient as possible. Remember, your harvester robot will need to have a direct path to the genmat. So make sure you build one as a placeholder if you're new to doing this, then you won't make any mistakes. Next, for tip number 4 and onwards, I have some basic trap tips on how you can bait people into dying in your base. Early on, you'll only have access to the spike trap, the lava, and the bolt trap until you unlock more from your base merchant, which you can easily do by raiding other people's bases. So for build tip number 4, we're going to be starting out with the bolt shot trap. This fires a load of bolts at the enemy as soon as they come into range. So in this example, the player is going to enter into this corridor, and at the end of this corridor, 8 squares away, we're going to put a bolt shot. So as soon as a player enters this square, that bolt shot's going to activate and fire all the bolts at them. So the player will do one of 2 things, or either run back this way, or they'll run forward into this corridor. But I'm going to have another bolt shot placed in this corridor, and this square here is exactly 8 squares away. So it only activates if they run into this corridor. That's going to be important later. So as an example, as you can see, that one activates, they run into this room, and then they get hit by these bolts, and they can't run away because they actually fire further than 8 squares. So if they make that mistake, they're dead. Another thing you can do with these traps is mod them. So you can unlock various modifications. Currently, I've only got this one, Second Wave. Hides the trap until after the genmat objective is stolen from the extractor. So if we activate this, what would happen is the player will be running down this corridor, and then after they come and steal the genmat, they'd be running down this corridor thinking everything's safe, but behind them there was actually a bolt trap that's only appeared later after they tried to leave. And you can do this by placing them at the end of these long corridors, so there's nowhere to run from. But you may be wondering to yourself, okay, what do we do if the player sees the bolt trap and then just comes back down here and dodges all the damage? Well, that's when we have tip number 5, the impaler or spike trap. Now, the best way to use these is to bait people to stand in them because they only have a range of 1 square. So let me show you a few examples. So the player is going to come around the corner, see our bolt trap, and immediately step back here to avoid it. Now we know that, so what we can do is put a spike trap right here. So as the player enters, they come down here, they look up here, they see the bolt trap, and then they run back and get hit by the spike trap. Now on the second attempt, the player would know about this spike trap, so they'd go ahead and blow it up, and then they might trigger the bolt trap and come back, but we've already killed them once, so that's great. What we can also do is create safe spots, which is basically a bait to get the player to jump into somewhere that's not safe. So if I delete this bit of corridor and then I put some walls around it, like so, I can then go ahead and get a spike trap and put it here. So then let's say, for example, I'm going to speed run this and I'm running in here. I see that safe spot. I come over here, but then there's a spike trap right behind me that I didn't see. So you're basically baiting players into positions that you know they're going to end up in. Now, if the player happens to get here, turn around and destroy this spike trap, then what we can do is make another corridor over here and we can put an enforcer there. Now we can upgrade this guard or make him patrol the area, but we're just going to leave him there because if someone lands here, destroys this trap, he's going to charge up his gun and then kill them. So I'm sure you guys are starting to get the point, but there's tons of other traps that we can combine together to create the ultimate death base. You can also use lots of different types of enemy AI, some of which fly, have armor and guns and so on. But for my next video, I'm actually going to be creating the ultimate death trap base for you guys to test out, to see if you can beat it. So grab the game from the link below and start practicing. And you can subscribe for that next video. I'll see you there.